Before capital S science ruined the world, it was commonplace for the customary man to be more spiritually minded and have a much deeper connection with the esoteric, even oftentimes believing there were physical places on the earth where the veil between worlds was thinner and maybe even easier to interact with. One of these places people of old believed this to be true were the locations outside of town where two roads intersect, often referred to as the Crossroads. A place where ancient cultures would often leave garbage and other waste, including the unclean spirits. Suicide was believed to be a crime against God and man, and quite the high crime, taken very seriously, especially in the 1700s. Thomas Aquinas gives us 3 reasons this was believed to be so, and I have to admit, I agree with his logic. First being the violation of the divine order. God gives you life on this material realm. God also takes that life away from you. Communities were also much smaller and close in those days. Every hand helped and needed to pull their weight. Being the second reason suicide was believed to be a crime. You not only harmed yourself, you harmed the community. And last, it is a violation of natural law. You must preserve life at all costs. This crime was seen as so heinous, the consequences followed you even after death. Peasants would go through great lengths to cover up suicides. Quote, depriving one's lords and ultimately the king of one's labor by killing oneself was seen as theft, end quote. Meaning the crown felt well within their rights to confiscate property posthumously, even holding juries to determine whether the act was perpetrated with malicious intent. Quote, once suicide was determined to have indeed been done with premeditation, the gruesome custom of profane crossroads burials would commence, end quote. In New York City at this time, the ordinary place to carry out these rituals, the intersection where Bloomingdale Road met the Bowery. In May of 1769, a man accused of piracy and murder decided to cheat his fate and commit suicide before the undertaker could have the honors the next day. Keeping with the traditions of English law, it was ruled Stephen Porter was deserving of one of these burials. Quote, in the public highway, with a stake through the heart. A stake being used to pin the spirit to the grave and keep them from, quote, rising up to meet God come judgment day, end quote. And should that fail, the crossroads were chosen to confuse spirits as they would wake every night. The amount of choices apparently being overwhelming, causing the spirit to simply stay put until dawn, when the spirit would then return home, back to the grave, forever trapping the energy of those lost souls to these physical locations. The last recorded account from England being Abel Griffiths, who killed himself after killing his father in June of 1823. Apparently being so highly criticized in the print media, it led to King George IV's passing of the Burial of Suicide Act, officially putting an end to the ritual. Another place known for its lost souls and dead bodies, the former Sandy Hill Road, has been given the name the Crossroads for nearly 350 years. Starting with the tavern of Cornelius von Seyck, this has been a location of change, wandering between worlds of rich and poor. From the tavern to Art Street to mercantile libraries and riots, this particular place has shaped our country in more ways than we can imagine. But just because Crossroads burials stopped doesn't mean blood stopped being spilled on the particular soil south of where Bloomingdale met the Bowery. Otherwise known as, since 1848, since the passing of John Jacob Astor, the Astor Place. Most people are familiar with the name John Jacob Astor because of John Jacob Astor IV's untimely passing as he returned home from his honeymoon on a small ship you may have heard of, the Titanic. Or the Olympic, depending on how tight you wear your tinfoil hat. The legacy of this family actually reaches much further back, and most of it happens to occur on the land that would eventually become known as the Astor Place. While John Jacob I is often credited with starting the family's fortunes with his fur trade, before he ever made a move, his brother, the lesser-known Henry Astor, was busting up the cattle monopoly of a tavern known as the Bull's Head, eventually being sued by the establishment for forestalling, but emerging victorious and even becoming the tavern's owner after the American Revolution. This is a truly fascinating family, full of wealth and controversy, also playing a major part in shaping New York City into what it is today, developing the Astor Place into one of the finest places of business, law, and child trafficking. We will talk plenty more about them in the next few episodes, but today, we want to keep our focus on the date of May 10, 1849, another day of bloodshed at the Crossroads. About 1 month earlier, our anti-hero Ned Buntline was being bludgeoned in the streets by a high-end prostitute he had berated in his little paper Ned Buntline's Own, named Catherine Hastings. Ned's words apparently being so bad they were censored from the newspaper. Quote, "These letters contain expressions too gross and indecent to meet the public gaze in a newspaper, and hence we cannot give them." End quote. Ned always was quite the classy fella. The paper too modest to print Buntline's words was none other than the New York Herald, founded and edited by our favorite puppet, James Gordon Bennett. Always the antagonist, Bennett covered the trial extensively and obviously not in a light that would make Buntline look like the gentleman that he most definitely was not. Buntline didn't even bother to show up to court. Hastings pled guilty to the assault charge and admitted to the crime, offering no apology as the published article against her was so abusive. The judge apparently agreed, telling Miss Hastings to keep her hands off Ned and only fined her 6 cents for the crime, which as far as I can tell, she did pay. Buntline, probably being drunk, pissed off and vengeful, marches down to James Gordon Bennett's office, apparently taking his anger out on the assistant, Thomas Patterson. As an aside, Patterson was later arrested for libel against Buntline, telling him, quote, "I will rip up the character of the whore of a sister of that cockeyed villain Bennett next week," end quote. Writing that Miss Keene was, quote, "in the habit of visiting various houses of ill fame in the city for the purpose of prostitution, and also that her likeness was to be seen publicly displayed at several houses of this character," end quote. Ned was also taken into custody for the case of libel on May 4, 1849, and subsequently bailed out by his father-in-law, Thomas Bennett, no relation to James Gordon Bennett, for $2,000, proving to be a complete waste of money. Ned would find himself in quite the pickle. Just 6 days later, quote, "indicted for being engaged in the Astor Place riot," end quote. Playing a leading role in the shenanigans, being the only one of 53 men to be held on bail. Interestingly enough, being only $1,000, half of the amount he was held on a simple case of libel against Bennett's sister. According to Wicked Media, this, quote, "riot resulted in the largest number of civilian casualties due to military action in the United States since the American Revolutionary War, and led to increased police militarization, for example, riot-controlled training and larger, heavier batons," end quote. Just another classic case of order ab chaos. The official narrative as to why this riot came to be is an apparent dispute between an American, Edwin Forrest, and a fucking Brit, William Charles Macready, two actors of prominence of the time, both traveling the world performing the Shakespearean play Macbeth. Though this explanation, even by Wicked Media, is called ostensible. There's much more evidence pointing to a dispute between classes, not actors, though actors may have been in the crowd to stoke the flames of chaos. Macbeth is a very interesting play in itself. I could spend hours just researching the art adaptation of life that this play is. But for the purposes of this video, I'd like to keep it simple and phone a fellow creator on this subject. As we are all finding out about Shakespeare, he may not have been Shakespeare at all. Very possibly an entirely other man or group of men. Francis Bacon is at the top of the list for suspects in this endeavor, a man often credited with founding the Fraternal Order of Freemasonry. But admittedly, this is a lot of speculation. He was a diplomat with a very interesting life, so there is a lot of documentation that he was, in fact, a living, breathing man at one point. But anything else from this far back can really be called into question. We've been lied to on such a massive scale about our past, we must take an apophatic approach to any question. We must first find out what things are not before we can find out what they are. Macbeth and the Astor Place riot are no different. We do not know the exact cause of the riot that night, but I am fairly certain it was not a dispute between which country had better actors. The Hidden Life is Best, Francis Bacon and the Gnostic Empire, tells the amazing tale of how Francis Bacon took over the world through capital S science or scientism. An extremely compelling tale with more relevance to the world we live in today than one may first think. Taken over by materialistic worldviews and trust in experts. The party told you to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It was their final, most essential command. In this 3-minute clip from episode 4, The Tragedy of Macbeth, Hidden in Plain Sight, it is explained how there is no happy ending to the story, and only one beneficiary, the English Empire, just like the real-life drama of the Astor Place riot.
What's odd about Macbeth is that the good never actually even confronts evil. Macbeth himself is not evil. He is a victim. He's a patsy. He is set up to do some very dirty work. But by whom? It all started with the witches. And the witches are very real. Banquo sees them. And Macbeth asked around about them. And he even goes back to see them at one point when everything is going to shit. They can be partly invisible. They can vanish and reappear like a spirit or a spook. And another word for spook is spy. A spy is a spook, and in the language of the day, a spy would be called an intelligencer. Spies are to be invisible in a sense. And it just so happens that Macbeth asked the witches, just after they make the first prediction of him becoming king, he asked them, "From whence did you get this strange intelligence?" Why would he say intelligence? Because it's a huge clue that the witches are in fact a metaphor for an intelligence operation because of what actually happens in the play. Macbeth is turned into a mind-controlled assassin who kills the king, starts a civil war that turns the country into such a mess that the English army invades Scotland in order to reset order. England is the only beneficiary of the entire scenario. Why would the witches mess with Macbeth in such a way? What do the witches get? The English army is the true hero of the play. Then the witches must have been working for the English army, and by extension English royalty, in this case specifically the Duke of Northumberland, who is in fact name-checked in the play, and whose son is sacrificed in the play. His son becomes the first person to challenge Macbeth. And it doesn't end well for the son, and the father is just grateful that the son was courageous. But the fact of the matter is, evil is not confronted. Evil lives on, and the death of Macbeth is simply a revenge killing by Macduff. Assassination is a time-tested way to create a power vacuum, cause a crisis, start a war, pick a side in the war and get the spoils and power at the end of the war, and you do it all while appearing to help, hiding in plain sight. The label on your chest says helper, not usurper. It's order out of chaos. It's a blueprint for problem, reaction, solution.
Spies and deception, life imitating art. And I believe the Macbeth of our real-life action playing out on the streets of New York City is none other than our anti-hero Ned Buntline, set up by three bearded witches for the sole purpose of order ab chaos. At the Crossroads, defined per Merriam-Webster's dictionary, C, a crucial point, especially where a decision must be made. In my opinion, the decision was made to alchemize what was known at the time as Art Street just 1 year earlier into what the Astor Place was originally intended to be. Quote, the Astor Place Opera House represented the desire for international recognition and catered mostly to the quote-unquote upper tens, the richest 10,000 citizens of New York, end quote. This was in stark contrast to the other theater about a 15-minute walk down the street known as the Bowery, a place known at the time for, quote, low entertainment whose performances reduced the importance of acknowledgement for the old world, end quote. Edward Forrest, being champion of the Bowery, and William Charles Macready was the desired actor to grace the Astor Place Opera House. Two theaters, two actors, two countries, two classes of people to pit against each other to ignite the Negrita. One perfect formula to achieve the magnum opus. Macready never intended to perform the night of May 10, 1849, being wrapped in controversy just days before. Edwin Forrest had been accused of interrupting Macready on stage and, quote, declared in public that Mr. Macready should never be permitted to appear again upon the stage in this city, end quote. Accusations apparently deemed false, but by all accounts seemed like a pretty typical behavior between actors and classes of the time. The disaster was almost averted, but thank the lucky stars, a politician came to the rescue. One Theodore Sedgwick, fourth Speaker of the United States House of Representatives, publishing a letter in the newspaper not only vouching for Mr. Forrest and signed by 48 other prominent parasites of New York City, but stating at the end, quote, that if any attempts are made to repeat the violence complained of, arrangements should be made to care of the disturbers, end quote. Well, that's interesting. We just learned earlier that this riot was directly responsible for increased police militarization. No surprise, quote, the city's elites were unanimous in their praise of the authorities, end quote. James Watson Webb stating, quote, the promptness of the authorities in calling out the armed forces and the unwavering steadiness with which the citizens obeyed the order to fire on the assembled mob was an excellent advertisement to the capitalist of the old world, that they might send their property to New York and rely upon the certainty that it would be safe from the clutches of red republicanism or Chartists or communists of any description. Not only are the city's elites delighted about the response of the military to the riot that killed anywhere from 22 to 31 rioters and injured 144 military men. The same day Sedgwick published his letter in the paper begging Macready to come back for his final performance, Sedgwick and his crew were apparently stoking the fire down by the Bowery. A one Judge Edmonds, seemingly the only one of three judges presiding over the case to care anything about the truth. He conducts an investigation and finds something very interesting through the deposition of a man named Tappan, quote, disclosing the fact that he and two others received the tickets on which they entered the theater on Thursday night in question from the committee that invited Mr. Macready to play, end quote. This article goes on to state, quote, that tickets were gratuitously distributed to persons who were afterward engaged in the riot and distributed by more than one of the gentlemen who signed the card calling on Mr. McCready to fulfill his engagement and promising to sustain him if he should do so. Upwards of 100 tickets were thus distributed and were afterwards sold at lower porterhouses for 25 cents each, end quote. The usual price of tickets was $1. Quote, I mention this fact, however, chiefly with the view of directing attention to the very remarkable alliance and acquaintance subsisting between certain gangs of ruffians in the city, and leading and influential members of society of all political parties. It cannot be doubted that the services of these gangs have often been secured in order to effect various objects, public and private, end quote, leaving no room for misinterpretation. This scathing article finally goes on to implicate any involved, not leaving room for the richest among them. Quote, the rioters outside the theater are liable for the riot, as well as those who were inside. So also are the instigators and conspirators, particularly those who gave tickets to those fellows. They are equally implicated, end quote. At the same time, Sedgwick and his minions were running around giving away tickets at a 75% discount. Ned Buntline also had his minions running around the town from the 5 Points to Astor Place, placing these posters on fences. And to me, this is a very interesting poster, especially when coupled with the entire context of the riot of that night. One of the most interesting points, I see no mention of either actors in question or theater performances at all. Interesting words I do see are working men and the crew of the British steamer have threatened all Americans who shall dare to express their opinions this night. Also, we advocate no violence, free men, and lawful rights. All things that would seem much more relevant to a dispute over immigration and class inequality rather than hissing actors, in my opinion. As we learned in previous episodes, Buntline was also part of the Know Nothing movement, otherwise known as the Native American Association of the United States, an organization vehemently against Irish Catholic immigration. So much so, the first article of its constitution states, quote, we bind ourselves to cooperate by all lawful means with our fellow native citizens in the United States to procure a repeal of the naturalization laws, end quote. Naturalization is defined by Cornell law per 8 U.S.C. 1101 subsection A subsection 23 as, quote, the conferring of nationality of a state upon a person after birth by any means whatsoever, end quote. So everybody wondering why all of these quote-unquote illegal immigrants crossing the border from 2022 to 2024 are somehow able to vote in our elections? Well, this is why. The definition of naturalization per 8 U.S.C., which is all about citizenship and nationality. You are a citizen simply because you say you are. And this has a much bigger implication on your life than you are probably aware. Citizenship is a very interesting body of law we will do many deep dives on here at All Aboard. Ask yourself, are you a United States citizen or a non-citizen national of the United States? The choice is truly yours. But for today, we must get back to the projected rotten egg that was the Astor Place riot, which happened on a Thursday. That Monday is when Edwin Forrest is accused of interrupting McCready on stage, starting with a rotten egg narrowly missing McCready's head, followed by 3 cheers for Edwin Forrest, then followed by 3 cheers for McCready, with equal enthusiasm, which sounds a lot like,
we need to go into the Capitol! Into the Capitol!
But what do I know? I'm just a stupid conspiracy theorist. It would be absolutely ridiculous to think that just because there were paid actors in the crowd May 10, there would be paid actors in the crowd just a few days earlier at the same theater. That would be a pattern of behavior, and the last thing your rulers want you to do is start recognizing patterns. The gruesome details of death and destruction of that night are not what is important about this event. Before the performance even began, the chief of police, G.W. Matzel, had 200 officers already surrounding the building, and another 75 stationed across the street, with an additional 2 platoons of 50 men stationed at the rear exit. Preemptively boarded up all the windows and doors and moved paving stones from a nearby construction site. The aforementioned arrangements, I supposed, all given at the orders of the mayor. The night after the event, there was a meeting held in the park near Astor Place where a crowd of 20 to 25,000 people had gathered to hear quote-unquote resolutions from the authorities. Resolutions seemingly the word used for propaganda before there was such a word. There were 2 other parks with scheduled rallies to talk about the events of the day before, but heavy military presence put an end to that. If you wanted to discuss the matter, you must listen to whom the authorities picked. The mayor and Mr. Matzel are both called into question, giving scathing reviews on the response to the riot, stating, quote, "We cannot sanction the murder of innocent men by those whose sworn duty it is to protect them and all the rights of the American citizen," end quote, going on to talk about the duties of authority during the event of the riot and how the military should be the last resort. Quote, "Exhaust the civil power of the country before resorting to the military, which is, in fact, the right arm of despotism, and ought to be the last resort of Americans," end quote. That I do 100% agree with. He then goes on to condemn the mayor for not closing the Opera House. He was said to have had prior knowledge of the riot, making this quite a sticky subject. Should mayors have the power to shut down businesses, even if only in the light of an emergency? I remember in 2020, mayors of cities, big and small, all over this great country, shut down businesses because of a sniffles emergency. I'll let you come to your own conclusions about that. He goes on and has stated resolutions to give the crowd exactly what they want to hear after an extremely emotionally charged event where so many of their peers had seemingly fallen once again to the scruples of the upper tens. Quote, "We look upon the sacrifice of human lives in the vicinity of the Astor Place Opera House last night as the most wanton, unprovoked, and murderous outrage ever perpetrated in the civilized world, and that the aiders, abettors, and instigators of that unparalleled crime deserve and shall receive the lasting censure and condemnation of this community." End quote. He's got to get the crowd warmed up before he really throws some gas in the fire, knowing exactly the feelings of the people gathered there that day. Mr. Strahan points the arrows at the crowd where he knows they will be most effective. Quote, "In our opinion, it is the imperative duty of the grand jury of the county to indict the mayor, recorder, and the sheriff of this city for ordering the military to fire on the citizens during the disastrous and bloody tragedy of last night." End quote. This was at a time when politicians and persons of perceived authority had to at least pay lip service to their constituents. This was basically
These are hardworking, great Americans. These are unbelievable people who have not been treated fairly.
Hillary called them deplorable.
They're not deplorable.
of 1849. Strahan goes on for a little longer, pleasing the crowd before leaving the stage to introduce an apparently quite popular fellow going by the name of Captain Reinders of the famous Empire Club. He goes on to give a similar speech, provoking even more enthusiasm from the crowd than Strahan on several occasions, rising gleeful cheers of agreement. He also clears the name of Edwin Forrest. Forrest had apparently been accused of being the one to have financed the sale of tickets to the gangs of ruffians down at the Five Points. Quote, "I would give $250 to anyone who would prove by good witness that I ever received 1 cent from Mr. Forrest, or anyone for such a purpose. End quote. Going on to state that he had made multiple trips to buy tickets to pass out at discounted rates, even taking a loan to accomplish his mission. Which may be the exact reason he was later pulled in front of the grand jury by none other than our aforementioned Judge Edmonds, along with one of Edwin Forrest's most intimate friends. In addition to Buntline, these are seemingly the only 3 other warrants ever issued in this matter. I haven't been able to track down the transcript of the trial yet, but I'll be sure to report on the findings when I do. I have a hunch our Mr. Forrest may have been implicated more than originally thought. After this event, Forrest's career was basically over, and he was said to have went into a depressive state. Quote, Forrest's reputation never quite recovered from this catastrophe. He acted only sporadically after 1852, spending much time alone in his gloomy Philadelphia mansion. End quote. This was only the beginning of consequences for this particular plot of land that had come to be known as the Astor Place only 1 year earlier in 1848. The Opera House was only in operation for about 2 years total, basically being a disaster from beginning to end. Interestingly enough, the doors were opened to the facility November 22nd, 1847, a pretty popular date to some people involved in the occult and esoteric. Exactly 116 years later, on November 22nd, 1963, the United States was victim to another tragic event in the form of a coup. 6 plus 3 is 9. 4 plus 7 is 11. I have no idea what these patterns mean. I simply recognize them. It definitely wouldn't be a method of communication between the parasite classes that have ruled over us with an iron fist since Babylon, because that would mean many of the major events that have happened over the centuries were actually carefully planned false flags to manipulate mass populations of people to not only be happy about their enslavement, but actually beg and fight for it. Whew. I had better stop. We are running out of tinfoil. The riot occurs on May 10, and by June 2nd, it is already being announced in the New York Herald. The theater, now colloquially known as Massacre Place, has been purchased by the trustees of the Astor Library, even calling this, quote, quite a sensible movement, end quote, calling for its use as a public place to be ended altogether. Quote, there could be no doubt that the theater never could be permanently popular as a place of public amusement. Nothing can obliterate those stains of blood, end quote.
Order.
Ab.
KO.
The significance of this purchase by this particular organization is quite vast, and will be the focus of all aboard for a while. A package worth unpacking very slowly and meticulously. The Astor Library was incorporated by an act of New York legislature on January 18, 1849. Quote, the act of incorporation fixed the number of Astor Library trustees at 11, end quote. 2 of these 11 are familiar to us. A1 Washington Irving and the mayor of New York, both parties named as some of the 48 prominent citizens whom begged for McCready to come back, and maybe even implicated in the distribution of discounted tickets to the gangs of New York before the riot. Having the mayor on board would also ensure the state always had a hand in and was at least aware of the doings of the library. Just one of many connections we are about to make with the library and transformation of not only the Astor Place, but New York City and America as a whole, on a fundamental level, in a seemingly alchemical way. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for today. Join us next time as we begin our exploration into the powerhouse of an organization that was the Astor Library, creating a place of business and child trafficking like no other, capable of many things, including possibly the entire rewriting of history as we know it. From the book, 4,000 Years of the World's Progress, released in concert with the International Exhibition of 1876. Quote, our main dependence in our research was the great and useful magazine of historic lore, the Astor Library. We have therefore compiled a new history of the world and one
Never before
Written.
End quote. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already, please check out the others and tell me what you think. Please share, like, and subscribe, all the good stuff. Don't forget to visit us on X at TLProductions33 and Instagram at TrueEarther. If you've made it this far, I truly appreciate you, and never forget, seek truth and honor the Creator, and let that be the whole of the law.
Thing is that everyone's word should be meant for a use.
And the words that I'm using today are meant to pull down idols within people's temples.
Meaning that I want to destroy
Falsities that they have idolized.
for their entire life.
And just pull those out and sweep them clean. And before that temple,
And get reinfested with a new lie. Give it true life.